Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to come on to the question of the ease by which you collect taxes, because obviously that also is fundamental to how successful and how much of an incentive tax is. Do you think that there is enough consideration given to making it easier and simpler for people to pay their taxes?
I think it's an incredibly valid point. The majority of tax, of course, is collected through the PAYE system, and although it's had its bit of a kicking this year in terms of the PAYE notice of coding, it's broadly actually held up very well over an extended period of time. The difficulty with the existing system is it wasn't built around multiple employments, people changing their job very frequently, maybe having 2, 3, 4 employments, and having a wider range of more extensive benefits in the sense of medical insurance, that kind of benefit in kind. But I think the success of the PAYE system is that people don't have to do that much for tax to be collected, and that's why it's been so efficient. When you start looking at other taxes that require extensive paperwork, people having to understand very complex issues, get their forms in right. I mean, very live at the moment, here we are in January, when a large part of the population who have to file tax returns are struggling to make sure they get their return in on time and get it in accurately. And there's quite a lot of complications as soon as you get into form filling exercises. So I think it is a very vital part of it. And certainly in terms of the success, if you can judge a tax in terms of success, the easier it is to get the money in, the more efficient it is to get the money in, the better it tends to work.
And so what about this move towards self-assessment and online filing? I mean, we have a separate review into the processes and workings of the HMRC, but I would have thought a key principle of any tax system is that it's got to be easy to collect and not fraught for the end user. And we all have examples, countless examples, as I'm sure you do, of companies who've inadvertently, they've made a genuine error, or they just don't understand and get themselves into all sorts of problems. And how much of a priority should it be? And what is the impact of all this self-assessment and online filing? For companies, not just for people.
If I can just pick up on the online filing point, I mean, there's a huge, an obvious draw and an opportunity with online filing to make some things more efficient and more effective. Having somebody having to key data in puts in another layer, both of cost but also potential error. And the real difficulty that's been around online filing for tax purposes is, has the system been able to cope? Is it sufficiently trialled, tested, piloted? Very live at the moment is the issue around IXBRL for corporate filing, about to come live in the UK. A lot of concern that on the accounting piece of that, not just the tax piece, but in the accounting piece, a lot of the software providers aren't ready or are struggling to be ready in time, partly out of their control, partly just of the complexity of actually having to produce it. And a huge concern for businesses knowing that they're going to have to file with potentially today not knowing quite what that's going to look like, what's it going to cost, what's it going to mean, how they're going to train. And it takes you back to what we tend to refer to often in tax as the Carter Principles around online filing from the Patrick Carter Review, that you should never introduce a system until it's been properly piloted, properly tested. As we all know, IT has a tendency to go wrong in the first 12 months. So it needs time to work effectively. There's nothing worse than introducing a system that falls down because the IS isn't quite ready or doesn't support what it's trying to achieve.
I think that, generally speaking, I think now online filing for individuals works well. And I think the reason it's worked well is, in fact, it's in everybody's interest to work well. It's obviously in HMRC's interest, but actually it's created a lot of efficiencies around accounting practices, and it's actually for individuals. But the lesson there is it's taken, 10 years? And these are very long projects. And it seems to me that this is a classic situation where to introduce you need carrot and stick. You have to have some form of stick to say, okay, we need to do this. But actually, what it should be is it becomes self-fulfilling, that it makes sense for the filer as well as for HMRC. And if you can get that to work and accept that it's going to take a long period of time, then I think you've got big advantages for everybody. I mean, none of us would want to go back to paper filing now, because we actually see that it has advantages for taxpayers and their agents. And we will get to the same thing, I'm certain, with corporation tax filing. But the message from me is that these are long-scale projects, that you can't expect to do them very quickly, and accept that actually it will be in everybody's interest for it to work properly over time.
Just one slight aside on that. Are you aware that members of Parliament aren't allowed to file online? And is that a matter of security? I mean, it does. The whole issue of security of data is that because it's so easy to break into the system?
That's the software not being capable of coping with what an MP's tax return looks like, to put the time, the effort of producing that part of the software, because there's some peculiarities around the way that MP's tax returns work. They've not invested the money in it to get the software ready to help it to file. Security-wise, I mean, I know there's a huge amount of energy gone into ensuring that it's the most robust system that HMRC can have, but of course they have been subject to repayment claim attacks, large volumes of fake repayment claims going in, so they have to be incredibly live to that. Anyone who's tried to set themselves up online will know the process you have to go through to get your activation code, to get it all set up. I'm just picking up on something Andrew said about the carrot and stick approach. What really won people over to online filing in relation to some of the early income tax related filing was actually getting some money back. Money talked there, and suddenly people thought it was a good idea when that carrot was there.
So what can be done to reduce the costs of collecting tax, generally speaking?
I would have one suggestion in relation to any new provisions, which is that if anybody in the Treasury or government or HMRC is putting together some form of policy, then they ought to, at the same time, be required to produce, at least in draft, the form that the taxpayer will need in order to get the benefit or report the income, or the box on the tax return. Because there's been a big disconnect in the past, that you've had some theoretical discussions, say, in the nature of pre-owned assets, inheritance tax, or some of the things in relation to employee share schemes, that in abstract may seem quite sensible. And then it's been very much at the last minute that somebody's actually thought, okay, well, what box are we going to put on the tax return to this? Or what form are people going to have to fill in order to claim this relief or report this? And where that happens, you then find almost certainly that after a couple of years there has to be radical changes to make it practical. So in terms of new policy, I would certainly advocate that as a very strong working practice. In terms of current efficiency of paying tax, I think actually HMRC have done a pretty good job in a lot of areas in this. I think their approach to debt management has been very, very good and much improved to where it was. I think electronic filing is the way forward. And I think it's to say, give it time to bed down rather than push it too fast. That would be my thing.
One last quick question, just about as we embed the new PAYE system over the next few years, what advice would you have for HMRC in trying to sort of keep the complexity down and avoid a repeat of what's just happened?
Well, I think the most useful thing they can learn from is in relation to the IT system, because obviously looking at real-time data exchange now for PAYE, again, that's a project you do not want to rush. And they've just come through that very difficult PAYE notice of coding time. They've done a lot of work on amalgamating databases and learn from that project. That took a long time to achieve. Real-time PAYE has a lot of attractions, but again, if it's rushed, it will go wrong.
So is that going to be another 10 years?
Let's hope it's less than that.
I don't think it'll take 10 years, but just forgive me, just to make one point in relation to your question about how you can simplify it. I think there's a more strategic point, which is that if we're talking about policy, the best way of simplifying the tax system is to try and only tax the same base once. So you don't try and apply lots of multiple taxes to the same type of income. I mean, an obvious example, which is controversial, is PAYE in income and national insurance, where you're actually applying different taxes to the same basic base, and that obviously hugely complicates the process.